morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We are now in our 35th episode of 2025. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco and Gaia, the platinum sponsors of Five for Breakfast. In Washington, D.C., members of Congress are going to return next week, and on Wednesday, September 3rd at 10 a.m., the House Small Business Committee will hold a full committee hearing titled Wired for Growth: How Expanding Broadband Can Revitalize Small Businesses, or real small businesses. So the Fiber Broadband Association welcomes this important discussion highlighting the small business angle of fiber broadband deployment, is its economic benefit, and look forward to the conversations on broadband's role in revitalizing rural communities. You know, at NTIA, the BEAD final proposals are being published by the states for public comment ahead of the September 4th deadline, with Texas and California granted extensions. So what we've seen so far is West Virginia is awarding 94% of its locations to fiber. North Dakota is at 93% fiber, Maine at 85% fiber, Virginia 81% fiber, Louisiana 80% fiber, Georgia 76% fiber, Wisconsin 74% fiber, Arkansas 76% fiber, Oklahoma 65% fiber, Pennsylvania 64% fiber, Colorado is kind of a strange one. It's 48% fiber, 2% fixed wireless, and 50% LEO. Ooh, hate to be in Colorado. And then Kansas is really strange. So it's 46% fiber and 51% fixed wireless and fiber. So I'm talking, and Joseph Lee is there's a lot of fiber in that fixed wireless and fiber, so I don't really know what that number is, but 3% LEO. So anyway, we'll see them keep rolling in. That's kind of all over the map there. At the FCC, the Fiber Broadband Association is preparing to submit comments in response to the FCC's annual Section 706 Notice of Inquiry, determine whether advanced telecommunications capability is being provided to all Americans in a reasonable and timely fashion. I remember back nearly 30 years ago, a friend of mine, Mark Zients, who's CEO of Westel at the time, he had these baseball caps made that had 706 across the front. And who knew that 30 years later, we'd still be filing our annual 76 comments. So interesting how the Telecom Act of 1996, we'll see whatever happens there. The Fiber Broadband Association's Regional Fiber Connect workshop in Toronto last week was our best yet. It was just absolutely amazing. So I can't wait to our next regional event in Spokane. It's in, Spokane. I looked that up. Spokane. It's on September 16th. Then we'll be followed by Scottsdale on October 16th, Kansas City on November 11th, and then we'll have our premier member meeting in Palm Springs on December 8th and 9th. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guest is Bree Maki, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development, to discuss best practices when dealing with BEAD complexities. Before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsors of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco and Gaia. Now, as participants, you are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question tool, which is located in the lower left-hand side of your screen. We will have a Q&A with our panelists at the end of today's discussion. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to respond. We appreciate the input. And with that, I will hand things back over to Gary to get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Dave, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Five for Breakfast, our guest was Ed Barrett, the President of Broadband at HR Green, to discuss Grading America's Broadband, the findings of the 2025 report card for America's infrastructure. Ed shared with us the American Society of Civil Engineers' first report card on our nation's broadband infrastructure. So spoiler alert, if you missed it, we got a C+. But if you missed last week's session, you can go to the website and watch the replay. Today in Fiber Breakfast, our guest is Bree Maki, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development, to discuss discuss best practices when dealing with BEAD complexity. Bree was appointed by the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in October 2022 to serve as the Executive Director of the Office of Broadband Development. She previously served as a Senior Outreach Director and as the State Broadband and Telecommunications Director for Minnesota U.S. Senator Tina Smith, and for Senator Al Franken, and she previously worked as the Office Administrator for Winona County Soil and Water Conservation District. In 2023, she was appointed to serve on the Governor's Infrastructure Resiliency Advisory Board. In 2024, she was appointed to the Minnesota Advisory Council on Infrastructure. Bree currently resides in Winona County and is in true form serving her community in Minnesota. She's the chair of the Lewiston Altura School Board, the chair of the Southeast Service Cooperative Board, and the vice chair of the Minnesota State Service Cooperative Board. So welcome, Bree. And for audience, please type in your questions as we walk through our discussion, and we'll work those in. So with that, let's get things started. So Bree, welcome. You're one of our favorites.
So that's very kind. Thank you.
Well, Rich, our program director for our conferences, he is like beside himself excited about our family feud that you're going to be on next year at our conference. And with the other state broadband directors, that is going to be a riot. So before we get started, chair of the school board. I can't think of the toughest job on the planet. I had a friend who was on the school board in Texas, and he literally had to have a police cruiser outside his house at night that protects him and his family from parents.
Wow.
So, hopefully things aren't that hard for you on that school board, but oh my God.
Well, I was on school board during COVID, and obviously during that time is a very stressful time for all people. And I think we need to always remember that the most important thing to anybody is their children. And so when you're dealing with parents and teachers, educators all around, community members, if you keep that in mind, that really our interest is the same, to care about our kids and make sure they get a quality education. People just get passionate in different ways. And so that's sort of been my guiding light. I never thought it'd be that hard. People always said it was the hardest. Born and raised and stayed in a community. Our school district's very small, and it's an opportunity for me to give back. So yes, challenging, but also very proud to be part of that system.
Well, you have a big heart, and hats off, and it's, I'm sure, some great training for your BEAD experience. So tell us a little bit about where you guys are in the process.
Yeah, so like every other state scrambling in these 90 days, we did get the okay yesterday from NTIA during our special award condition meeting to move forward from NTIA. And if everything falls into place today, as other state directors know what this is about, everything's fluid and moving. We're hoping to go out for public comment tomorrow and do that for the 7 days and hit our September 4th deadline. So again, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of trust and leaning on the relationships and the resiliency of our providers and our community members to stick with us during this process. Hats off to them because, we're doing the hard work, but they're doing the commitments. So.
Well, we have the greatest appreciation for you, the work that you're doing and your team and all your colleagues across all 56 states and territories. We know it was a tough job before, and then the 90 days made it a little bit tougher. But I'm glad that you guys are finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So in June of 2024, so about a year ago, you had about 74,500 unserved and 46,700 underserved. Where did you end up going into the benefit of the bargain round?
Yeah, we ended up at 76,000 about locations that were eligible for BEAD funding. So
that's quite a few less. Did you see what happened? So it's kind of a curveball that Lutnick threw in there with this unlicensed fixed wireless. How did that impact your location?
Yeah, that certainly did impact our locations. And I think let's rewind just for a quick second, Gary. One of the challenging things for the state of Minnesota is the definition of unserved and underserved and the statutory language that we carry with that prior to BEAD. And so a lot of our work up front and even now is educating in communities and educating folks on the difference between what is eligible for BEAD and what would be eligible for our state programs by definition. And we have wireline in our statutory language. So it's been very challenging in that regard to make sure that we can kind of compartmentalize those things. And for the average person who just wants broadband, reliable broadband, including myself on fixed wireless, it is challenging to explain that technically you have it by definition with the BEAD program. So just wanted to raise that as another kind of challenge for a state of Minnesota. And we're not the only state. There are other states that have been doing this a long time, but sometimes that does feel like an extra barrier in this work because the expectations are just different.
Yeah, I mean, when I talked to Jessica a while back in Georgia, she's like, well, the state statute is it has to be a terrestrial service to be served. And so when you throw in these, LEO or unlicensed wireless, and, it's like, how do you reconcile what the state law is versus what we're being told by these federal programs? So can you talk a little bit about, so we've had a number of bites of the apple, with Reconnect and CAF, and then, we had ARPA, and then RDOF, and whatever other state monies you had. So kind of, can you walk us through kind of, and when I talked to Eric, he was talking about how they put a lot of money into middle mile and things like that. Was there anything special that you guys had been kind of working up to this moment to try to shore up your critical broadband infrastructure across the state?
Yeah, the state itself has invested over $400 million. And of course, when we're talking BEAD dollars, maybe that doesn't feel like a lot. But for an individual state to use general fund money over the past 12 years to fund this because it is a priority for the state, I think is commendable. And not only did we develop the border-to-border grant program, which provided up to 50% in a subsidy, so making that business case for providers to go out in really low dense communities, it has evolved into the lower population. So then it moved to the 75% eligible cost, because we're stretching further and further. And now with capital projects dollars, we were able to create the line extension program, which really is that last connection. And all of them have been over prescribed when we're doing applications. There is a need out there, but there's also a desire for internet service providers to meet their neighbors and customers where they're at, and making sure and ensure that they have the tools they need to be successful wherever they live in the state. So we were really, I think, right on things with the capital projects dollars. We worked really closely with Treasury. We allocated, we're wrapping up projects and utilizing that money as fast as we can, as well as our state program. I think this summer we're on target to close out 53 current grants out of our rounds. And that's just a testament to not only are we doing BEAD, but the state is continuing to do what it's invested in with other dollars.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Capital Projects Fund. So, Joey Winder and his team of 4 got out $10 billion pretty quick. And, we're coming up on our 4th birthday of the IIJA, and yet no shovels in the ground. So can you tell us about, your Capital Projects Fund, what percentage of those, if you were to guess, was fiber projects versus some other technology?
Well, I think almost all of it.
100%. Yeah.
So it did run through our border grant program, so followed those rules, and also, so, there was additional speed components and reporting that our providers were responsible for doing because it was federal dollars. So meshing those together. Our programs are technology agnostic in the state of Minnesota, so anybody can apply for grants, but you have to meet the goals and the requirements of the program on latency and speed and all those technical components. And often we know that that is fiber in most cases. So that program, like I said, we hit the ground running as fast as we could. Providers were eager to use that money, and residents were excited to have that service.
So what is it about and maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like that went very seamless. The money got out really quick. You guys were able to deploy it, get to use, and got to have a great outcome. Why did that seem to work so well, yet BEAD seems so hard?
It's a really great question. I think with the capital projects, there was an over sense of urgency because it was COVID. People needed it now. And Treasury really took the approach of getting it to states fast, and states implemented it fast when they could because they had the infrastructure and were ready to go. And states that didn't have that infrastructure maybe took a little bit while longer because this was new to them. I think, if this is just Bree talking, but I think with BEAD there's such a pressure to get this perfect that we're actually forgetting how potentially easy it could be. And again, putting it with the states who have worked really closely with their providers, with their communities, with their lawmakers, all of those things, perhaps could have streamlined that. But again, I do think that the component of BEAD that has just been really challenging is this hope that it's perfect. And I think we all know, depending on your state, perfection is defined in many different ways.
So, okay, prior to June 6th, you were on a certain path. And then when the revisions came down, I've heard you and other venues talk about that you have less applications. Kind of tell us the pre-June 6th and post-June 6th, kind of what your observations were.
Well, I think first and foremost is there's a level of burnout and confusion. Change is hard, even when it's clear. But then when there's so much uncertainty, unclearness, that created some chaos. And for providers that continue to invest every day, they're doing it. Communities continue. Small counties are investing in their providers. Sometimes it's cheaper just to do it yourself and do it in tranches and know what's best for your business model than it is to take on, a 10-year federal investment and not still having guidance on what the reporting requirements may or may not be. And so just that level of uncertainty has cooled folks off. In Minnesota, we also, with some of those changes in the policy notice, are areas that we strongly care about, whether it's climate resiliency, whether it's workforce standards, whether it is opportunities for all folks. And so I think every state sort of had to look at that, and our goal is to serve as many people as we can. Even with BEAD, if we did, every dollar that we can invest in making sure people have the type of broadband that they deserve is a step forward. We knew when we started this, $652 million as an allocation for Minnesota was not going to finish the job based on our statutory language. It just got a little bit more challenging with the policy notice changes and the way that technology was approached with this policy notice.
So while, we're not super happy with how hard it's been for you guys. One of the things the administration did do is with one of the aspects of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was bonus depreciation and, creating much more free cash flow for service providers, which we're seeing about $4 to $5 billion a year being plowed into fiber. Are you seeing a uptick on private investment in fiber in Minnesota?
I think To a degree. I think it's happening. Like I said, I think it's always happening. Now, just remember my head's been down working on BEAD. So, getting as much extras and sort of figuring out where the state fits in the next legislative session, in the next tranche of how we're going to do things has been a little bit outside my view right now. But I do know it's happening. I see it in my own community. I know where there's state projects and in general federal projects, so I can tell that there's the investment happening, and we're appreciative of that. And we also know that every move forward and expansion creates opportunity as it continues to expand. So all of that investment is a good thing. Speed is maybe where those of us or those folks that don't have broadband are sitting here going, I thought I was getting it 4 years ago. And that's been sort of, like I said, a challenge to set up expectations all around. But yes, I think industry is stepping up and doing the investments that they can make for not only their community, but what's best for their business interests too.
So when you think about going forward, so a lot of the states now have been able to minimize, with kind of the focus on the benefit of the bargain round to focus on lowest possible cost, being able to come in well below their allocation and have what we'll call non-deployment funds available. Given that you had such a tight budget, and what can you say about what kind of non-deployment funds you may or may not have?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really allocate or over consider non-deployment funds at the start of this because we didn't even think we'd get to CAIs. Again, we did a cost data analysis, private, and had our numbers. We knew based on line extension and historical data that, I mean, if we were going to close and get everybody as defined in Minnesota, now let's again separate that out, as defined in Minnesota, it would probably be about $1.2 billion. And that's in general fiber to everybody. We do know it doesn't make sense to get fiber across the river 3 miles to a little island. Like, we understand that. But I would just say, like, in the scheme of all of this, we knew it was going to take a little bit more. Now we will essentially probably have non-deployment dollars, but we also know these challenging locations to serve are also being hit with simple things like emergency management connections, and how do they access in rural Minnesota their ambulance when they're in need, or any other sort of component. So we're really trying to look at that. We also know AI is a huge thing. In my intro that you were so kind to introduce me, I'm on a resiliency board. What does that look like? What does that look like for broadband and the infrastructure that we're all building? So we're looking at it. We don't have a lot of time to look at it, but we're definitely looking at it in hope that we can maximize our requests to NTIA. Ultimately, we know in all this conversation, the decision's up to them. We're hopeful, and we're doing the best we can for the states that we serve.
So two things you mentioned there. One was AI, but I want to ask about tribal first. When we were just in Alaska a month ago, and they said the golden hour doesn't exist. When you have an emergency situation, getting someone to a hospital within an hour when you're in the remote reaches of Alaska just is not possible. You guys have a similar situation in northern Minnesota. So how do you look at, how can you provide emergency services and be able to have that critical broadband connectivity, whether it's just remote ultrasounds to, emergency things where someone gets injured? Are you able to get the infrastructure in place for that with the BEAD money that you have?
Well, again, we definitely are considering it, and I think, though we are not as remote as Alaska, but even in Minnesota, I mean, we have karst topography and different topography and landscape across the state, and there are often spots that there's no cell service. So if you don't have even cell service, and we know landlines have essentially gone away, you don't have access to emergency needs. And I hit that less than a mile from my home. I know when I drop down, that's how it's going to be until I get to the next location where I will have service again. And those are real issues. The other issues, which I know is a little off topic, but these small communities rely on volunteers. And so volunteers need access to making sure that they can be accessible during a time of need, when they also live and work in rural communities across the state. So it all falls together, whether you're the one that needs it and whether you're the one you're trying to provide it. Access is really key, and making sure, all of the infrastructures are tied together in a way that can work. And when one doesn't work, the other one can make sure that it's working as a backup, is so important.
So can you talk a little bit about your tribal nations and coordination you did with the tribes? And, one opportunity with BEAD is that if you coupled that with, tribal communities, you could reduce or minimize or get rid of your match. Did you see providers that tried to build in some tribal communities in their proposals, and how'd that work out for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we're again still evaluating our final numbers, but we had 6 of our tribes that had a BEAD eligible locations. And I think even stepping back, we were required to do consultation based on the federal guidelines, but in Minnesota, tribal consultation is a key to any of the work that we do. That is one of the reasons we were one of the later states to get our Volume 2 approved, because we need to consult with their tribes, even as what is the low cost plan that you see fit and reasonable within your communities. I was not going to set that. That is inappropriate and not the way we do business in Minnesota. And so we have continued to do that with them. We will again continue. NTIA did loosen the rules a little bit, where having tribal consent is not necessary until the contracting of an actual project and the locations are clearly and finalized and identified, which gave us a little room. But again, we need to make sure they know what providers, and then with our border to border program and our state programs, we never would fund a project unless they had that tribal consent and that relationship with our tribal partners, to be able to do that infrastructure, whether it's on or near those tribal nations. So this is key, and it's just a foundation of how Minnesota works.
So you mentioned AI a few minutes ago, and it seems to me like Minnesota would be a perfect state to have AI hyperscalers and AI critical infrastructure, given the access to water, the Land O'Lakes, and your cool climate. And I'm not sure exactly how your power infrastructure is, but that's a huge priority for the administration. How are you guys feeling about your critical AI infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak for the office itself, but I think you're raising really important key components as far as the state and the resources that we have and the interest that we have. And yes, I think we have really key partners. You brought up Land O'Lakes. Teddy Bickelli is our chair, and he's with Land O'Lakes of the Governor's Broadband Task Force. And so we have great businesses across the state that are interested in this and will help lead that. As a state agency, our job is really to help support those efforts, whether it's financially or through different programs, different tools that maybe we have, bringing folks together, doing that partnership. So we stand ready. We're interested. It's an and also kind of thing for the office itself, but really any of us state agencies are taking dives into that and really trying to find out what is the best use of our resources to be able to support that expansion and making sure Minnesota can be a leader in those areas.
Bree, I wish we had more time, because I always enjoy talking to you. And I'm just so impressed with all the hard work that you and your team and all your colleagues across all 56 states and territories, just amazing work. And, we're looking forward to seeing your draft proposal of tomorrow. I know that you guys worked really hard on that, and we hope you guys have the best possible outcome. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday with Nick Saporito, the head of product for Google Fiber, who's going to be discussing fiber slicing, unlocking a more open, customized, and secure experience. So join us next week to talk to Google Fiber. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Bree.